This is the Forgotten Ways Podcast, the show where we explore what it looks like to both love God and honor the earth. Join me, Brandon Scott Elrod, in fun interviews with friends who are clergy, philosophers, politicians, business owners, and regular folks like you and me, who are all learning and growing in both our faith and our environmental stewardship. Hi, everybody. This is Brandon Elrod, and I am here with Doug Brown. Doug Brown is a friend of mine. He's got a rich history, formerly a pastor. He most recently has founded a nonprofit for people struggling with infertility. And Doug holds a master's degree in philosophy from Talbot Seminary. And Doug is on the program today to talk through some of the philosophical side of the blend of faith and environmental stewardship. So welcome, Doug.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. I've been looking forward to this. I think there's a lot to talk about. I'm excited.
I'm excited to have you here. Doug is a very smart, very intelligent, very well-studied individual.
You're too kind.
We have lots of fun talking about C.S. Lewis and Oxford and Tolkien and all that wonderful, rich folklore. So, Doug, today we want to start with this topic of this question. Does it seem that Christians don't really care about the environment? Of your years in the church, years in ministry, of the circles that you operate in, of being out in the marketplace, does this seem like an accurate perception, or is it something that is mostly a caricature that that we see in the media, or what's your experience with that?
It's a big question. It's a great question. I think absolutely there is an issue with Christian belief about the environment. I think generally people don't care enough about the environment in which the environments in which they live in. Mm-hmm. The houses, the cars they drive, the earth that they're walking on. But it just so happens that the Christian thinking has a lot of thoughts about the earth, and in some I guess you could say sects or denominations of Christianity, they're armed with the ability of thinking about a new earth or a new heaven that's going to be remade. So there's a lot of tools that they have to either dismiss care for the earth at all, or to pick up the mantle and really care for it. So I think Christians in and of themselves are charged either one direction or the other when it comes to caring about the earth. So I think it's a really interesting topic. I could probably say from my personal opinion that the believers and the Christians that I've interacted with, there isn't a huge sense of needing to care about the earth, okay. But that there will be a future where things are remade, so mm-hmm. the current status of what we have now is less important. However, there are pockets of people who are the exact opposite, and I think even part of the reason what we're talking here today is that I think there is a growing movement of people who realize that more needs to be done, more conversation needs to be had. So a long answer to saying yes. I think the majority of Christians I've interacted with, they don't care enough.
Okay, so. Do you think that is more based from a Western modern perspective? Is that based more in theology, or is that based more in the reality of, living in a culture where we have systems, we have trash, we have recycling, we have everything? There's not this impending, obvious, in your face, critical need wherever we turn, as we're driving to work, as we're not seeing it firsthand, so maybe it's out of sight, out of mind. Which do you think plays into it more, the theology or our perspective? Yeah,
I think I want to say that our perspective is the thing that probably hits us first, and then is backed by a theology, maybe, is what I would want to say.
Okay.
I think maybe like, how you slow cook a frog, mm-hmm. you just slowly kind of get incubated with something. I think it's the same thing, but with our ideas about the environment. For me, I grew up here in Southern California. I'm a surfer. I love the ocean. I love the beach. I've been introduced to environmentalism and even caring for the earth through my surfing, But I think for all of us who've grown up, we only really ever see what we're exposed to. And you have to take into consideration where we live. That I have friends in the developing world who, the way they see the environment and the way they see things like trash being dealt with, or waste or chemicals, things like that, is very different than what I'm going through. So for me, I would say I'm slow cooked into not caring, just because the trash gets picked up every Thursday or whatever.
It's automatic.
I got a dumpster, where I live, just throw everything away. There's not really a consequence by that. But then at the same time, you have this idea of that this is passing away. It's almost of no consequence. When it comes to the theology side of things, that we have this sense of things will be remade. I will be raptured. I will be taken away from this. So it's this, meeting of two ideas that, you're slow cooked into thinking it doesn't really matter. Yeah. And then maybe you even have some theological backing that it really doesn't matter.
Right.
So I think you end up with a problem. You end up with this idea that it never ever enters your sphere of thinking that I need to be carrying.
I think you're right. I think we're just honestly oblivious.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. Yeah.
And it's kind of almost a neutral thing. We just don't encounter it, so therefore it's not critical, it's not urgent, and yeah, to your point, we have theology that may support oblivion. Yeah. Weird way of putting it. Yeah. Let me ask you a question about surfing then. Did you see? Is that something that you encountered? Yeah. Coastal pollution, anything like that? Did you see any change, positive or negative, over years being active doing that?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because we're all surfers right now. As we're recording this podcast, it's we have the rain is impending. Like, we're going into the more rainy season after a dry summer is normal. But as surfers, we hate this season, because as the rain comes, all of what's been in the storm drains and the runoff is all about to come out into the ocean. And there's the people talk about how you shouldn't surf after it rains and things like that. And then that is because I've seen trash in the water. I've seen, I know it's horrible to even talk about, but I've seen hypodermic needles on the beach. Just a general sense of just the water being unclean, just a feeling of oiliness to the water, and that's all stuff I've seen. However, it actually has gotten, in some ways, this will be an interesting season, but in some ways it was worse 10, 15 years ago. There has been some marked effort by places like the Surfrider Foundation, right? We're here in Southern California, the Bolsa Chica
wetlands,
the wetlands. Yeah, people taking some serious efforts. And for me, as someone who's out in the water, that means a lot to me, because I'm the one who's swimming in that water. So I think I've seen it get better. However, I think it's only opened my eyes to, man, it's a drop in the bucket of how much work needs to be done.
Yeah. My dad was a helicopter pilot throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s in Southern California. And he describes very clearly remembering the transition in air pollution.
Wow, yeah.
In the 70s, it was just terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. Brown. The sky was brown.
Yeah.
And he's flying in it. He's breathing it. He's in it at eye level. And, of course, we know that there's been EPA regulations, air quality regulations. There's local ordinance. And some of that may frustrate some people or cause some inconvenience.
Right.
But the net effect is that over the decades, the sky in Southern California has become, for the most part, very clear.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's an odd day that you see the sky looking like there's smog or something.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great example, in addition to your experience of seeing firsthand, and seeing progression, seeing improvement, and really being able to tie that improvement to people caring.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about the theological side of it.
Okay, deal.
So a little bit about theology.
Yeah.
having a pastor's background here. What is some of the more recent theology that has contributed to maybe modern apathy when it comes to environmental stewardship?
Yeah, I even want to just lead by saying there are a lot of different ways to approach the Christian thought on this. So, I would be remiss to say, or remorse to say, that this is the all of Christian thought or all of Christian theology. But certainly there is a slice of it that has really contributed in my life in ways of thinking about the environment. And I would say it goes back to apocalyptic thinking at the turn of the century in response to liberalism. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
But I think the idea that we are going to be raptured out, the apocalypse is coming, and we will be taken away from the environment and caring about the way we talk about natural things. You have the introduction of Darwinism being taught in schools, this kind of like a rejection of the way the modern culture was even viewing the earth. The idea that we were, we're part of an evolutionary system, a rejection of that, a rejection of all of these earthly things, and a looking towards this coming apocalypse.
Right.
It just lends itself to not caring about the here and now, the world that we're living in. There's this, I'm a stranger, I'm an alien. And again, there's truth in all of these passages. These are a lot of, if you're unfamiliar, the idea of a stranger and an alien here on earth, those are Christian themes that we're kind of, and this is how I picked it up, we're passing through. Right. So what we have here is just this real intermediate land.
It's a bus stop.
Totally, yeah. It's like, it's the ashtray next to like the restaurant as you go in. It's like, well, you do whatever you want with this because you got something good coming. And I think there is a theological core there that it was even taught that way, that this will be consumed by fire. A new earth will be made, and then there is where maybe you can pick up your environmentalism, but here it's a waste. The sin nature of mankind combined with the fallen nature of earth in the Genesis 3 fall view. Is this earth? We've ruined it. Like it's kind of broken. We might as well discard it and wait for the new one. I mean, that's the least environmental thought probably I could think of, right? That at its core, this earth is rotten, so we might as well abandon it. So you're never going to get environmentalism out of that, right? I mean, so I think that's I think for me the core of that theological idea.
So there's two thoughts embedded in there. You have the earth has fallen,
right?
So and that's the consequence of sin. And this idea that the earth is imprinted now. It's inherently different than the perfect thing that was originally created. Right. And then the second part of that being that it's cursed. That the earth is cursed. Yeah. So what do you think people normally read into or assume about the word cursed? If the earth is cursed, how do we process that? What's our takeaway?
Right. I think our takeaway is it's lost. It's unproductive. It will only bring about its curse. If it's cursed to be rotten, it's a lost hope. And I think that's what the idea behind the earth is fallen. So why would we ever try to make it unfallen? Like, why would we ever try to make it something that it's been cursed to be? Right. So I think that's where you get that theme of, well, the only option is we must leave. We must be taken away from it. Unredeemable, yeah.
Pack your bags.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that idea of, well, if the earth is cursed, and even that it's the house or the place of my sin and the place of so much fallenness, unredeemable. So that to me, for a curse, I get the theme of hopelessness. It's like this ground is
Yeah.
You will toil to get things from it. Well, it's like, oh, forget it. The whole thing's going to be burned anyway.
Yeah. I think for a lot of folks, the notion of it being cursed, they equate with it being evil. That there's it's a synonymous term, which I think is unfortunate, because that's not what a curse means.
Exactly. Yeah.
To curse something, it takes away a degree of its life, a degree of its vitality. Doesn't declare it to be something wicked. It just makes it less than. And so if we reflect on the consequence of the fall in Genesis, the fall of man, then I think that's an accurate way to read that. We lost something. The earth lost something. It lost a degree of vitality, a degree of naturally just exuding forth life. And so even the passage that says, "Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you will eat of it all the days of your life." They already had the mandate. Our ancestors had the mandate to cultivate the earth. Whether that was inside paradise or outside of paradise, the job was still the same. Now it's just going to be a lot harder, because the earth wasn't just going to naturally spring forth with abundance without the effort. So I think that's an important permission for people that want to move more into this area of environmental stewardship. They love God. They want to love the earth, honor the Lord, honor His design, take better care of it. The permission that this place isn't evil just because a curse was on the land. Does that sit right with you?
Absolutely sits right with me. There's a popular theme that's in the Bible, and there's a passage about it where when the Lord, when Christ returns, there's this. It says that two people will be in the field, and one will be taken. And I think it's often been thought, and at the turn of the century, I think it was taught this way, that the one taken is the blessed one. Well, the one left behind is they're stuck on earth. I think in the way I read it, and I think the way the more modern understanding of it, and the way that's more accurate to understand it, is the one left on the earth is the blessed one. The one left in the presence of a good earth that is yielding that's the blessing. And I think that's what we need to recover from our theology that said, well, we need to escape. I think we need to go back and see that the true freedom is finding oneness and connectivity with the Creator in the creation that He gave us, in its perfect form. And what we are experiencing now is a lack of vitality, but that vitality will be restored. It's not it's not some Mars world. It's this world with its vitality restored. And I think that's a better theology. I think that's a more accurate depiction of what we see happen on Earth. I don't see people finding freedom and escaping. I think we find people finding freedom in stewardship and tending well to what they have. So it all lines up, and I think there are probably political, social, and theological reasons why we moved to an escapism idea. But I think it's time. It's time for us to understand and go back to a recapturing of that idea that the earth is good, and we have a place in that. So
with this notion that the earth is good, and that would make it the sum of its parts, being greater than the sum of its parts. If we look at some of the parts themselves, then, if we look at rocks and trees, and we look at how God in Scripture, primarily in the Old Testament, engaged with humanity through that venue. We have the examples. We have the burning bush. That's an odd thing to choose, but he chose it. Statements to Moses: "Take off your sandals. This is holy ground." When God is giving instructions for building an altar, He makes sure to state, "Leave the stones in their natural state that I designed and I created them. Don't chisel them. I want them natural." And so God is choosing this design using natural materials that He made, that He says is holy. He says is consecrated. He says is blessed. Don't defile it with human touch and human design. Maintain my design.
Yeah.
So does that imply an inherent specialness? And if so, is that something that you see Christians having a hard time declaring the specialness or acknowledging the specialness of elements of nature without it going weird?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think there is difficulty for Christians to do exactly what you're saying, which is biblical. But, when you were talking, it made me think of so many times when people see a beautiful sunset, they're like, well, look what, the creator, look what our God did, the greatest artist and all that sort of thing. But then at the same time, we look at, things on the earth, the way things are, the way things ought to be, the trees that we ought to let grow, all of that sort of stuff, and we just mutilate it, right? But then at night, driving down the giant freeway in our truck that's just destroying the air behind it, we're like, look at this, how beautiful this sunset is. And it's this like, where does our thinking go wrong, where we can attribute such mastery to creation in what we're looking at, yet stand on such defiled ground, so to speak,
right,
and not have that consistent way of thinking throughout. It's fascinating. Yeah.
So in the context of God designing earth from a divine source, from himself. Mm-hmm. So there's divine inspiration, there's divine energy bringing it to life, there's divine decree, there's divine assignment as he gives it to us.
Yeah.
To steward, to manage, to cultivate, to bring life out of, to order and organize. So if we, as Christians, can acknowledge that storyline of specialness, then, and if we can acknowledge Romans 1, it says here, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that mankind is without excuse. Okay, we can hold to that. So we've just skipped from the beginning of the Old Testament to the middle of the New Testament. Right. Do we really have any platform or excuse or reason to be dismissive if it was special in its origin, and if it continues to be special in manifesting and declaring the handiwork of God, his nature, his characteristics? Do we have a leg to stand on if we reject that original mandate to rule the earth, to cultivate it, to steward it?
Yeah, I don't think so at all. I think we stand guilty in a way of such an original idea. In so many ways, we are in opposition to it. We are not only passive, we're in opposition, and I think that is it ought to spur us on to at least, conversation, right? Like about the way we're doing things, and the way you set it up and even say it that way. It doesn't sound like we can be passive, Maybe you could find some kind of argument for, being neutral about the way we treat the earth, but I would say that the way most of us live is in excess.
Kind of do no harm.
Yeah, kind of just net zero. Like, I'm not the worst. I'm not the best. But I think most of us in the culture we live, where it's just the opposite. We're bringing harm to what was been given to us, and if that's the case, we have no leg to stand on. But yeah, we ought to be confronted with that reality.
Would you go so far as to say that apathy, or worse yet, destructiveness in our patterns and habits is dishonoring to the Lord?
Yeah, I'm feeling convicted now. This is amazing. I think there is a. I think so. You would have to think that there are so many things, and we could, there's another conversation about fallenness. What does that look like, even in of ourselves? There's so many things where I think we miss true design. If things were designed beautifully and designed well, I think we do a dishonoring to the creator to manipulate the design so much. It's not even that we're fiddling with it to kind of tweak it. We're breaking it almost. A beautiful tool or a beautiful building that is just so misused. It's almost you're right. It's dishonoring to the creator, and I think we are at risk without conversation and without dealing with it in a communal setting. I think we are at risk of standing guilty. Yeah, absolutely.
So when Jesus says, Mark 16:15, it's a bracketed verse, so this is a topic for another podcast. But it says, talking about Jesus, he said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel, preach the good news to all creation." Mm-hmm. And the Greek there for creation is straight up creation.
What was created?
What was created? Go preach the good news.
Yeah.
What do you think that we can infer from that passage?
Yeah, I think a burden, I would say, just off the top of my head. That's where I would pick up a sense of purpose and a sense of responsibility that creation deserves the restorative nature of Christ.
And if that's the case then, and we hear a mandate in this, it would sound like we're not waiting for him to do the restoration entirely on his own, that this is something that he's inviting us into.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's exactly the way I view that. We've picked it up. The mantle is in a way with us now, is this spreading of the restorative nature, the goodness of Christ to all of creation.
So clearly, this passage is talking about the gospel. It's talking about the good news. It's talking about freedom from sin, freedom from curse, freedom from fear, freedom from all kinds of things, referencing Jesus' mission in Luke 4. Mm-hmm. I think we can make the case that the trickle down, maybe it starts at a spiritual level, of engaging and bringing the good news to creation, bringing freedom to everything he created, freeing it from the clutch of the enemy, freeing it from the power of sin. Yeah. But that logically, that should trickle down into the physical ways that we engage with it and interact with it and consume it and protect it and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have done very little work in understanding what that passage and that idea that's springing forth from the gospel, we've done very little work on what that means beyond helping people become Christians, helping people become converts, you know. There's so much more there. There's a richness just in the way that it's laid out, the plan in which is there. And I think we need to go back and start figuring out the ways we missed it. Yeah. So
with that in mind, as you're talking about converts and our perhaps more recent approach in the last 100 years or so, what are your thoughts of Christian nonprofits and missions agencies that are taking more of an environmental stewardship approach in reaching out and reaching cross-culturally, and using that as a means to bring the gospel?
I think it's wonderful. I do. I think it would be sad to see them mislabeled as being progressive for progressive's sake, or that they're on that side of the view. I think that's not the right way to think about it. I think using the care for the environment, it ought not to be viewed as I think a tool that they're using that. I think it just ought to be part of what we do, and that believers ought to be people who are known for their stewardship of the earth and what we've been given. So I love it. I think it's a direction that we ought to go as believers, is picking up that mantle that maybe we put down and saying, we care about the environments in which you exist. I think it shows no greater care for a person to say the very ground you walk on is important to us. The water you drink, the fruit you eat, is of concern to us. We want it to be we want to care for that, and in doing that, we care for you. to me, there's no greater compliment to say something like that. Yeah.
But Doug, that sounds like a lot more work.
Yeah, maybe it's the right kind of work. Maybe we've created such a problem in that we dropped a portion, or maybe the majority of the work that we ought to be doing, this restorative work, where external environment and internal environment are cohesive and play off each other. Maybe we're missing that internal environment because we're missing the external environment, and that's true in all these ways. My wife and I, we run a nonprofit for people struggling with infertility. It's the same kind of thing, right? We can't say, "Hey, we're here for you." It's great. That sounds like really it's a bummer what you're going through. No, we got to jump fully in and say your environment is important. What you're going through is important. For someone who lives in Irvine, which is a city here, it's very well manicured, very well taken care of here in Southern California. It's going to be different for us to say, to jump over to someone, so I have friends who live in Albania, for us to say, the city you live in is important for us, the way it's treating its air, its ground, its food. To care about that is to care about them almost more than us coming in and saying, hey, we want to make sure your theology's right or something. Right. That to care about the food that they're eating, that's so far above and beyond. It automatically encompasses their internal being,
Right. Mm-hmm. So we had earlier in the podcast had talked about oblivion. Right. If we're just unaware. Yeah. So you brought up Albania. So turn the tables on us and talk about what the opposite of oblivion is for your friends that are living there. Yeah. What are they facing?
Yeah, it's such a different way of thinking. They're entrenched in the world that they live in. I love Albania. It's a beautiful place, but it's a place with less regulations. Mm-hmm. It's a place where there's less systems in place to take care of the waste that they have, or the chemicals that they're using on their food. And and they're aware of it. They're aware of that the food that they eat is beautiful, it's plump, it's wonderful, but it's been treated in a way to make it look that way. Mm-hmm. So for them, this idea about caring for the environment is paramount, because it's not taken for granted that someone else is going to do it. It's on them to protect themselves and to care for the land that they're in, because the land that they're in is, in a way, it's caring for them. So our wonderful friends over there, they're good at finding the areas where they can eat really non-chemically treated food, and they know the places to go and the nature to be in. But that's because it's the world in which they live. And I think for us, we're so quick to say we're out of here. It's just like, this whole thing is going to waste. But for them, they take so much pride in the land that they live because it's so beautiful. But they understand that without concerted effort, it won't be taken care of.
Right. I've similarly been to Kenya many times, and there's a little town in Kenya that is a town originally formed by squatters. Private land is not government land, and this ultimately built up over the years to be an actual little mini city. Wow. Without any infrastructure, because it was just shacks that grew on shacks, and so the refuse is in the streets. Yeah. The wastewater runs through the streets. Electrical wires lay on the ground. Yeah. It is, and it's kind of a hopeless situation because the government still can't do anything. It's private land. Right. So, one of the conversations that I had with a local church over there is, man, you're centered right in the middle of this little shanty town. Mm-hmm. What if you just made it your project to keep the street in front of your church facility clean? Yeah. Like, just pick up the trash. Yeah. 50 feet this direction, 50 feet that direction. Yeah. And but it was such a bizarre concept. Like, wait, we should pick up the trash?
Yeah.
But why? Like, that's just how it is.
Right,
It's everywhere.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
it's almost kind of the opposite scenario of here, where we just don't even really think about it
Yeah.
because we don't see it.
Right.
And in some of these situations like this one, they don't even think about it
Right.
because it's just normal.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Right.
So, but I think there's opportunity no matter where we live to be that light and make a difference in the community, the land we live on, the homes that we live in, and have that be a very direct blessing to the people around us.
Absolutely.
So, I feel like we should probably talk about the guilt side of this,
Yes,
right? I mean, we're
yes.
taking this hardline approach. We should be doing more. So, to start very simply, how can a person move into baby steps? What's a practical way for somebody to get involved when perhaps this seems overwhelming?
Yeah.
And maybe it's a person who's barely making ends meet, and I don't have any extra money to put towards
Right,
anything
right.
fancy. I don't have any extra time. I'm just trying to survive.
Right.
So how deep does a person have to dig to move into this?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, and me being myself, just constantly wanting to grow and be better at this. So I think, I wear as much guilt as everyone else. I would say, for me, I'm a very cerebral person, and I believe that the way we think about things, it changes the way we do things. And ideas are powerful. For me, what I would say is begin to educate yourself. It's a really simple tool. There's amazing information here from what we're talking about, but also through books and articles and things like that. For me, I always felt like is the care for the environment, is this going to turn into a long to-do list of things I have to do? But when I began and still am changing the way I view the situation from a very philosophical or very theological or just very social human level, the actions they flow so much easier when I see the kind of the behind the curtain view. So for me, I would say taking a step closer to understanding will make the actions feel better. the simple steps feeling better, the being conscious by how much waste you're creating, being conscious about, what kind of vehicles you drive or the way you're treating even your household items. It just starts to click and you start to realize, oh, well, that is because if I do this, I know the outcome of that, and I'm not comfortable with the outcome of that. I think you begin to find yourself really having this deeper care for the earth.
I think you're right, and I think part of what is embedded in that is, I know for someone like myself, is the idea of permissions.
Yeah,
there's permissions, and I know for a lot of folks that they are involved, they do care. But maybe they feel alone in it. Maybe they feel like this isn't something that the church really cares about as a whole. This is more of like their individual area of passion, and they just do it quietly on their own.
Right.
I think I would say that maybe a place to start is where an individual notices the need or notices the opportunity the most in their own household.
Yeah.
We had some drought restrictions a few years back, and so what we started doing was all of the glasses that weren't completely used up, all the water.
Yeah.
We just started collecting all the water in a little pitcher, and that pitcher would go to fill the dog bowl, water plants. I mean, it's basic, but it kept over time. I mean, it's gallons upon gallons upon gallons of water.
Yeah.
That, maybe that's a drop in the bucket, big picture, but that's not the point.
Right.
It's not how much of a difference you can make individually. It's just that you're stepping into it.
Right. Yeah.
And that there's freedom in that. There can be fun in it. It can be life-giving. It can bring relief. It can translate any number of ways. I know for some folks, they're more passionate about, zero waste. You got some friends that are really, really doing a great job with that.
Yeah.
And others that their commitment is going vegetarian or going vegan. Mm-hmm. Others that it's about water use or recycling or, so on and so on.
Yeah.
And I think there's opportunity there in what is your individual area of interest? What lights up the most for you?
Yeah. For me, I think what are those areas of passion where you're intersecting with the environment, the world you live in? For me, it's so obvious as surfing, being at the beach. Like, I think I a passion for what our beaches look like, the rivers that run into that water, because I'm there. Is it self-serving? Sure. Yeah, I want to be surfing in clean water, but it's a part that I can latch onto and say, well, now I'm going to kind of trace that back up to the line.
It's part of your story,
and see exactly where I can jump in and help. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that makes sense. I've thought of a cool name for you. I'm going to call you the Cerebral Surfer. TM.
Deal. Yeah. Trademark. Yeah, there we go.
Well, this has been fantastic. I've enjoyed talking with you, Doug, about this. Absolutely. There's clearly, so much more to talk about, but this just a way to kind of prime the pump and get the ball rolling on conversation. And we want to continue talking about these topics and flushing them out further. And I thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time. You've been listening to the Forgotten Ways podcast with Brandon Scott Elrod. To find out more, visit forgottenways.org. Join us next time as we once again explore what it can look like to love God and respect the earth, beginning with our own heads, hearts, and homes.